Today, Matt and I are talking about something he and I have worked on for the last couple of years called the Build HD standard, which, if implemented properly, will yield a home that will last 100 to 500 years. So let's break this up into two parts and see how it goes. Matt, you and I have spent the last number of years talking about how we can define our goals and our motivations to build very good, high-quality homes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been a journey.
Yep.
And I think just within the last couple of years, we've began to distill all those ideas and concepts that we've been talking about for the last 15 years in building science, so that we can begin to understand more about the specific improvements that we like to implement in all the houses that we built, with the goal in mind to build homes that last more than 100 years.
Yeah.
That's a hard concept for a lot of not just builders, but homeowners to understand. What does that mean, right? So I think let's spend some time first talking about what a really well-built home means, and then secondly, how do we get there? How do we achieve that?
Yeah, and let me kind of set an overall framework too. I think you mentioned it's hard for us to see this, as Texans or as Americans. We don't have examples necessarily of 500-year-old houses, right?
No.
Or even a whole lot of in Austin, Texas. There's not too many 100-year-old houses.
That's
frankly. Right. You go to Boston, you go to some of these older towns, you can see 100-year-old houses, no problem.
Right.
But you don't see 500-year-old houses.
Right.
However, you and I have traveled the world, and I got to say that's been real eye-opening for me as a builder, because I grew up in a 1950s house that I thought of as an old house when it was, I was born in the 70s, so it was 20 or 30 years old is all when I was born there. But as I've traveled some outside of America, I've realized, gosh, our houses are really young.
Right.
And we tend to have a very short-term thinking when it comes to houses. And we tend to be a little egotistical, frankly, to think that things are just for us. Whereas if you have a bigger worldview, a bigger mindset, man, when I was in Japan, I was in wood frame structures that were 1,000 years old. And when I went to Europe, I've been to Europe a couple times now, they weren't wood framed, they were masonry.
Mm-hmm.
But I was in buildings that were, several hundred years old. And I went to England one time and stayed in actually a Cotswold cottage that was like from 1200 AD, right? And that was wood framed.
Yeah.
So, the mentality of other places besides where we live tends to be a very long-term thinking.
That's right.
And so I think that's really what we're talking about here is kind of adjusting our thought from short-term to long-term.
Right. We have a tendency to believe that the things we manufacture, the things we create are commodities.
Yeah.
Right. And they're replaceable, disposable. And for things that are as expensive and as important as dwellings, homes that we live in, I think you're right. We have to shift that way of thinking so that we can assume that whatever we build for living purposes is something that should be passed generation to generation to generation and survive and perform well throughout that time.
That's right.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
So if that's true, then what are some of the core concepts that we need to be thinking about, Tim?
Well, for decades, the home building industry has talked about efficiency and sustainability as key philosophical drivers in what we do.
Yep.
But actually, those are just byproducts of actually good building,
right?
Good building practices.
That's right.
I think what we should focus on are the more important fundamentals of durability, forgiveness, and resilience.
I like that.
If we bake those into the design and the execution of everything we build, the efficiency of the home will be good. The health and comfort of the home will be good. It will just service, the people that use it, so much better over a long period of time. It will cost less to maintain. It will cost less to operate. And the end result is, even though it may cost a little more to build it, in the long run, it's going to be a much better, quote unquote, investment, or will service its users much better.
I like how you say that. If we build with durability, forgiveness, and resilience, we'll naturally get sustainability and efficiency.
That's right.
Define those terms for me a little bit, will you? The three of those: durability, forgiveness, resilience. How do you define those three? Because I think some people might have those overlapping in their minds, but they are pretty distinct, aren't they?
Well, they are, but they are interrelated. That's right. Durability, of course, is a common term that we use to understand the structure and how it's tied together and holds up over time. And there are a lot of parts to that, whether it's the site, the foundation, the framing, the skeleton, the roof, all those things, and the way they're constructed, the way they're tied together. It has to do with the fundamental strength of the home, right? Now, I don't care how well you build something, how strong you build it, if it's not protected or built in such a way that that structure is shielded from adversity, then over time, that structure will degrade.
Right.
And so not only do we have to build strong, durable structures, we have to build into that the forgiveness or the resilience to overcome and last and survive those stressors that all homes are subject to.
So then define forgiveness for me. How do you define forgiveness?
Forgiveness is simply the ability to withstand extremes without suffering from those extremes. In other words, it's shielding the structure and the envelope from the extremes. Larger overhangs would be a good example, right?
Yeah.
So that the house is not washed with sheets and torrents of rain when you have heavy rain or wind events.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
Also, within the structure itself, having good hardware that ties it together, having good connections and fasteners will help it withstand extreme pressures from foundation upheaval or soil movement or to high winds. So all of those things combined make the home easier to withstand those extremes. It may be a great structure to start with, but it needs to also have some amount of shielding or ability to withstand those extremes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. As opposed to resilience, which is a very similar related, but the resilience is the ability to experience those extremes, suffer from those extremes, but then bounce back from those extremes, right? So, for example, let's assume that the cladding on a house in a storm and wind event leaks.
Right.
We have to assume that the cladding is going to leak. It's just going to happen. But if it's built properly, and that water, that bulk water that gets through the cladding is able to dry and drain properly, the house will not suffer for
That's
it,
right.
right?
Yeah.
It'll bounce right back.
Yeah, for sure. Bulk water, flooding, heavy rains, that's definitely speaking towards resilience and thinking about resilience.
That's right.
For sure. So then where do we go next? So knowing that we're looking for a durable, a forgiving, and a resilient house that will yield naturally towards sustainable and efficient, how do we get there? What's the process?
Well, I mean, every successful project requires a substantial amount of good planning, right? And planning in and of itself is, I think, at least half of the goal of creating a 100-year home, a very durable, long-lasting home.
Yep.
So it's primarily about the planning and all the components that go into that planning process, all the considerations that you have to have that go into that. And I think what you have to first start with is understanding the fundamentals of what homes are going to be subjected to over its lifespan. What are the major stressors, if you will, of a home's lifespan?
Yep.
And I like to look at as 5 different parts: the soil movement, the stability of the soil that the house sits on, the high winds that it might be subjected to, the heavy rains or floods that it might be subjected to, the heat and humidity that it might be subjected to, and then potential power outage or outages or grid instability that might happen from time to time.
Seems like that's more and more of an issue for us. That's
It
for
is.
sure.
That's right. It's happening more and more often. So those are the fundamental things that you have to understand and prepare for in the planning process. And then look at it from the standpoint of, as we've talked about, structure, and then the envelope of that structure, the enclosure, if you will. And then finally, the mechanical and electrical components that help manage the fluctuations of the inside environment of the house.
Yeah, that's
Right.
good. That's good. Of those stressors, what are the most destructive, or what are the worst of those for that long-term durability on the house, would you say, Tim?
In our philosophy, you and I really believe that water is the most detrimental thing that a home can be experienced to. Interesting to note that insurance companies and legal claims would tell you that soil movement is the cause of most lawsuits.
Interesting.
Right. And generally that's because they happen more obviously. They're more overt. You see the results of that more quickly.
Yeah.
Water, on the other hand, generally is a long-term detriment. You can have a leak and not really know about it or worry about it until it becomes a major problem. Right. And so we know that long-term detriment is continued bulk water exposure that you have to manage well. And so I would argue in our world, from the design standpoint, let's assume that our structural professionals are really good at understanding and manage the structural needs of the design. What's missing in our design process in our world is people that can really tell you about good enclosure details, how you need to manage for keeping the water where it needs to be. And so that's why we focus on that so much, is because that's something that nobody really seems to worry as much about in design.
Yeah, I want to go back to something you said too, which is interesting. You basically said, if I'm summarizing correctly, that soil movement is a big insurance issue and also can be a big lawsuit issue.
Right.
I think there's an argument to be made that soil movement could also fall under the category of water issues.
That's true.
Especially in Texas, where soil movement tends to be expansive soils, which means that there's typically some type of clay material that, as the clay absorbs water, it expands, and that movement wasn't accounted for properly in the foundation design and the excavation. Maybe we shouldn't have built a house on that site to begin with,
Right.
Or we should have taken a more serious approach to the foundation. But ultimately, that also could be under this kind of banner of water as the enemy.
That's right. It's not just the structure itself and the enclosure that's subjected to the water. It's the site itself.
Yeah.
And so you keep the water moving away from the site, away from the structure. Generally, the soil underneath the structure is going to be more uniform and move at a more consistent or predictable rate.
Yeah, for sure. Man, good stuff, Tim. We got a lot to think about when we're building a house to 100 years. I'd also propose that if you're building a house to last 100 years, that there's no reason why that same house wouldn't last 500 years. The reason and of course, this is all theory, right? Because I'm not going to be around 100 years from now to know if that house is still in good shape. But Joe Stebrick, who's probably the best mind I've ever known in my lifetime, or I've known who's alive currently, in building science, talks about his 500-year wall, 500-year home. And we're basically taking his principles and saying, let's put this together with the rest of the things that interact with that wall to create a house that would last 100 years. But I think if Joe was on the podcast today, he would say, Tim, I think what you're doing here is actually a 500-year house, not a 100-year house.
The only difference between a 500-year home and a 100-year home is maintenance.
That's a great point.
Now, I will say there's another component of that, and this is a whole nother topic we could spend a lot of time on. But maintenance is a function of serviceability. It's something we haven't talked about yet.
I like that. Yeah.
And I think that whenever we design a home, whenever we build a home, we have to think that this is not something that's going to be used for 30 years and be torn down. It's something that's going to be used for 30 years. And over that time, it's going to be serviced and maintained and upgraded, right?
Yeah.
So how easy is it to service a house? What amount of demolition does it take to replace or upgrade certain components as newer products, better products become available, or old products wear out and need to be replaced? How easy is it to go through that process? How much destructive work do you have to do? And in doing that, how much do you damage the envelope that you've created?
Right.
So I think serviceability is something that has to be baked into design, which will then yield easier maintenance, less expensive maintenance, and a longer lasting home.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a bigger topic, but I got to say it's one that I think about. Every murder mystery movie or mansion horror movie involves a service cavity in the house with someone sneaking around or the murderers back there. But those service cavities were intended to get to put a person, an electrician, a plumber, whomever, inside the body of the house to service and maintain in these service cavities. And we don't do that anymore. Like when I built my house, I was really trying to figure out, okay, I've got a 2-story house. How do I service my ceiling someday? Because if I've got a joint in my PEX plumbing, that joint ain't lasting 500 years.
No.
At some point, it's going to have to get replaced. And I'll be honest, I didn't do a good job of that. I wish that I would have been able to do, something maybe not too different from what we've got in our podcast studio, which is a grid ceiling that you just pop down the grid and upgrade whatever you need and pop it back in. I didn't do that, but man, I've thought about that a ton about how I could do that. And the next home I build, I'm either going to, for my family that is, I'm either going to have a removable ceiling, or my wife really wants to build a 1-story house, which makes me think, well, if I did a 1-story house and I had nothing but attic above every room in my house, I could say to the plumber, hey, the only joints you're allowed to have are outside of the wall cavity. So put a joint in the attic and run the plumbing in the conditioned attic space, run that pipe continuously down and out the wall with either a piece of bend in the copper or a bend in the PEX, and then you got a joint inside that's serviceable, and you got a joint in the attic that's serviceable.
Wow.
And maybe even the same with my wiring. Let's put my wiring into a conduit so I could just pull it up out of the attic, pop a new wire in someday, and I would be good to go. Yeah. Wouldn't that be I know I'm way off the fringes here on this topic.
I think these are great points
but that's the serviceability.
It is. And we don't put any water piping into our foundations anymore.
Yeah, that's right. That's
this
right.
is something we don't do. We used to, but over time, when those water pipes would fail under the slab, one, it was impossible to find them.
Yeah.
Two, is impossible to navigate around that and
jackhammering
and bypass it.
Uh-huh.
So we always put them, in the walls or up in the attic now, or in the interstitial space.
Way more
if you will.
serviceable.
And I think the industry will evolve. Here's what happens is that we think, I say we, and it seems like the arrogance of thinking that we have it figured out, that our current building technology is it.
Mm-hmm.
We've solved all the problems. We know what to do.
Yep.
Here's the best way to build a house, and this house is going to live forever.
Yeah.
But that has to be accompanied by the understanding that this industry and all the technology and all the science is going to continue to evolve.
Mm-hmm.
And what we think of as today's great plumbing practices or wiring practices or air conditioning, that's all going to get torn out and replaced by newer, better products in the future.
Yeah.
We have to think, we got to build a house so that when that happens, it's easy to do.
That's right.
Right?
Yep.
Even if it costs a couple of % more to do that today,
yep.
The people that use it 30 years from now that have to go through that process are like, this builder, I got to find out who he was because he's a genius, right?
That's right, exactly.
He may be dead, but he was really good at what he thought through.
Totally.
Right?
Totally.
So, yeah.
Feels good.
Yeah.
Where do we go to next? You want to go to part 2 on this, or should we keep going here a little bit?
No, I think this is a great place to start, Matt. Let's pick this up on part 2.
Okay, I like it. We'll see you next time, guys.
Sounds good.